Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
There's no end to government theft. The man in charge of TARP, the $700 billion bailout of banks, is now calling it a colossal failure. But my buddy Stuart Varney says, not so fast. I let Varney have it. Next. There's no end to government theft. They steal, they lie, they take us to war. One huge example, the $700 billion bank bailout known as TARP. It was supposed to put an end to risky lending that helped cause the financial crisis, and it was supposed to buy up risky mortgage securities. It did neither. And now the government's point person on TARP, Neil Barofsky, calls the program a colossal failure. Stuart Varney, my friend and colleague, says not so fast. He's host of Varney and Company, the only show on the planet that starts at 20 after the hour, 9:20 in the morning, Eastern Time, weekdays. Stuart, welcome here. Yep. Okay, so TARP was supposed to solve the housing crisis. It didn't. TARP was supposed to solve too big to fail. It didn't. TARP was supposed to buy up bad mortgages and bad mortgage paper. It didn't. Why is Barofsky wrong when he says it was a failure?
Well, Barofsky is saying that it was a failure in the sense that it did not stop the creation and the growing of big banks which are too big to fail. In that sense, he is right. What we should have done was to go in and make sure that banks do not become so big, taking such a huge chunk of the market that they do fail. Barofsky's right only in that sense.
All right, how do you deal with the moral hazard argument, which basically stated is if the government puts a safety net under the excessive behavior of banks, that will encourage rather than deter excessive behavior in the future?
I deal with it in the following way. There is indeed moral hazard, and you're quite right to point it out, but banks are special because they are.
What do you mean they're special? They're just businesses like everything else.
No, they're not just businesses. Banks are where the money is, as Mr. Sutton once said.
Right.
No,
Willie
they are
Sutton.
Special. Willie Sutton. Thank you. I was struggling for that one, Judge. Thank you very much.
The famous
they're special because they're at the very centre of what is basically a financial economy. The banks go under, and it's a terrible thing. Now, wait.
Go under. Somebody buys them and operates the profitable part, and the bad parts go away, like happened with Barclays and Lehman Brothers.
It was so bad in October of 2008 that there was nobody around to buy these banks, which would have had a chain reaction failure had the TARP money and the Federal Reserve not stepped in.
Instead, thanks to Henry Paulson and George Bush and the attitude of theirs that you embrace, that potential failure was visited upon the taxpayers,
so you think
rather than the people who owned the banks and mismanaged them, Stuart Varney.
Well, I'm glad that I've got an attitude, because in this particular case, Judge, the taxpayer got their money back. All of that TARP money, almost all of it, with a couple of $1 billion, all of it. Did you deal with it? All of that money has come back to the taxpayer.
How does the government decide who to bail out and who to let die on the vine? Stated differently, why did they give cash to Citibank and not to Lehman Brothers?
Because that I don't understand.
All right.
You got me,
and
Judge.
You know that's a constitutional problem because the government's supposed to treat similarly situated people in a similar way.
The Treasury Secretary said he did not have the authority to bail out Lehman. Mysteriously, he did have the authority to bail out all of the banks. Now, I don't get that.
Okay.
I don't get it.
Okay, were your colleagues in London, in Barclays, who bought the good parts of Lehman Brothers and made them profitable, were they not free to do that? And was that not a wise decision?
First of all, they are not my colleagues.
Okay.
I may have a British accent,
former
but
countryman.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a very good point, Judge. And maybe that could have happened with some of the American banks. They could have sold off the profitable parts and disposed of the bad parts and taken the losses.
But
no. I want you to go back to October of 2008.
I remember the dread.
If you had not backstopped the banks, you would have 25% unemployment within a matter of weeks.
Why did former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury Neil Barofsky, who studied TARP and monitored it 24/7, last week call it a colossal failure?
Because it was a failure because TARP did not reform the banks and make sure that nobody grew too big to fail. That was the failure.
We still have those banks that are too big to fail out there.
Yes,
still
we
big
do.
and still potentially failing.
And they're still special because they're still right in the middle of the financial system, and if they fail again, we should bail them out.
All right. If you like this, Varney and I do it every morning on his show, 9:20 a.m. on the Fox Business Network, called Varney and Company. Stuart, it's a pleasure.
Thank you, Judge.
Have a great weekend. Disturbing new details emerging on President Obama's secret authorization of covert operations in Libya. Could we actually be helping Al-Qaeda? A former top intelligence agent explains next. Disturbing new details are emerging about President Obama's secret